here we are, and welcome to Set the Table, Episode 2, brought to you in part by Red Hoodie Games. I am Jack Skoda, owner of Red Hoodie, and aspiring game designer and general junior nerd. With me is my co-host, my dad, Jack, an uber nerd, professor who teaches a history of role-playing games course, as well as somebody who engages in all manner of general nerdery. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, on episode 1, we sort of introduced ourselves and talked about our own histories playing role-play games and where we are now, where we have come from, the games that we have played, what games we currently play, and why we are talking about tabletop gaming. The large draw to that being that more often than not, when people are trying to get into tabletop role-playing games, they will seek out content online, be it YouTube or Reddit or what have you, and will look for or make posts asking, hey, I'm the new DM. What do I do? Please help. And so while communities like that, wherever you find them, are great sources for those sort of things, we thought that it would be a valuable resource to provide a running show that talks about all things being a dungeon master, game master, table master, headmaster, whatever.
Storyteller, game mother, referee, judge. Oh, the new alien. You're the GM is the game mother.
Ooh, okay.
Because the computer in the alien spaceship was mother.
Oh, nice. So
hey, before you get rolling on what we're going to talk about this week, what have you played since the last show?
I haven't. Well, like general games or tabletop games?
Tabletop games.
Oh, well, so it's been holidays after holidays, so my D&D group is taking a little break.
Bunch of pansies. We played through the holidays.
I know. It was like I have already had a hard enough time scheduling with everybody, and that should be a future episode, scheduling. But otherwise, the only tabletop thing that I've played has been the Catan dice game, which Callie got for Christmas.
I wonder where she got that.
Yeah, I wonder.
So my group continued to play through the holidays. Mm-hmm. I played my continuing saga of 5th edition, which is funny because we added a new player to our group.
Nice.
And added a new character to the party. And my character is a Smurfneblin bard, and she is a College of Whisperers bard. So she inspires terror in people. And I'm a bit of a method actor. So when I'm doing vicious mockery, I try to come up with something that mocks the person that I'm fighting. And when I do my words of terror, I write a little story, or I come up with a little, like, you're going to terrorize this guy. And my Smurfneblin was an accountant. Her backstory is she was an accountant in a drow house. So she's hung around with drow elves for more years than she probably would like to. So she related the story of how she got her ebony skin boots to a giant who almost stepped on her. And then she threatened the giant with flaying his hands while he was still awake and conscious, and making slippers out of his palms. And this new player is sitting through this like, oh, and all the other players are like, we're really scared of Del Rey. We're really scared of Del Rey. She's the boss, and we don't challenge her. And when he's a rogue, so he's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna pickpocket her. And everyone else in the party is like,
oh no,
dude, she'll take your finger. Like,
don't do it. She'll do it.
So then they kind of read him. So he got to read some of that backstory, and he was like, oh yeah, I'm not pickpocketing that lady.
Nice.
So that was played my 5th edition, and then our DM is going to take a break, and I'm going to get to GM Game Mother, the new alien role-play game.
You're starting that on Monday, right?
On Monday, I'm starting that. Yep. We're going to play We're going to play on Roll20, and the game is out of gas on LV426 because that's how the game starts. You're in a ground vehicle. You're coming back to Hadley's Hope, which is the setting of the second Aliens movie, about a month before the Sulaco arrives and the movie starts. But the colonists have been infected, and that's all I'm going to say so far.
Okay, very cool.
It's gonna be a lot of fun. It's gonna be it's a horror. Well, we'll talk about genres here in a minute. We'll talk about sci-fi and horror genres and that kind of stuff. So,
Indeed.
So that's what we played.
Do you have any space in that game?
I could make space in that game if you wanted to play a little Alien.
Maybe that might be a fun thing to record as well.
It could be, yeah, yep.
But we can talk more about that later if you'd like.
Later, yes.
So for now, in this episode, our episode 2, in episode 1 we talked a lot about how you get started, and there are lots of things to touch upon. But one of the things that we lingered on a little bit was picking a genre and picking a game system. In all of our examples from episode 1, we sort of run with the assumption that your group has already selected a system to play with, and most folks, I don't want to say most because I don't know the proportion on it, my guess would be a majority of people playing tabletop role-playing games are playing D&D, and folks are getting into D&D being that it is mainstream. You've seen it on YouTube, you saw the references to it in Stranger Things. That was a big bump to D&D patronage, and it's really only the only mainstream tabletop RPG. I think if you were to ask people, on the street, hey, what role-playing games have you heard of? I feel like 8 out of 10 people would say Dungeons and Dragons. One person would say nothing, and maybe one other person would say something different.
Maybe they would think it in a naughty context.
Oh, sure, right.
Role play. Ooh, yeah, my wife and I, and whatever.
Who are you to ask me questions like
that? Yeah, mind your business. We did spend a lot of time in the first show talking about genres of role play games and how, while Dungeons and Dragons is in the mainstream and it's the that's the number one game. Right. It's not a bad game. Don't get me wrong. I play it every week. Right. Have a lot of fun playing it. But there are games that I would rather play. There are better role-playing systems out there, and it is a combination of the style of game you want to play and the setting that you're most comfortable in. And there are a plethora, a smorgasbord, a massive list, which we're about to go into here, that talks about the different genres and games and styles and that kind of stuff. So
D&D is one system. It might be the most popular, and as you have noted, it is typically one setting. You've got the fantasy settings within the D&D canon, but like we were talking about in episode 1, what if you want to play a sci-fi game? Can you do sci-fi with 5e? You could, but you're using 100% homebrew content.
No, my friend. Okay. No. Goodman Games just released Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, which Gary Gygax wrote for Origins 20 some odd years ago. And it is he got a lot of pushback from that because in Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, published by TSR, which is canon, your adventurers find a crashed spaceship.
Oh. Okay. Well,
so
I sit corrected.
So it gets that module is one of those that you either love it, and I'm in that camp, so I'm just throwing my biases right out there. I love Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, or you hate it because I don't want my elf archer having to engage an android in combat.
Or you were like me and didn't know that it existed.
Or you don't know that it exists, but it does. There is in the old AD&D system, yeah, Gygax wrote, and I just got the hardcover. So Goodman Games has been not to do a commercial for Goodman Games. Hey,
Do it
goes, if
up.
you want to sponsor us, we'll do it. But they've been publishing some of the very historical modules, and when we have the show on modules, I'll bring them and show them to the camera and stuff. But uh, that's one of them. That's one of those like classic, like Tomb of Horrors, which got a lot of press for the Ready Player One book. I haven't seen the movie yet, but the book was amazing. Uh, and you know, people have this concept of these original modules, and that's one of them. So yeah, you can do sci-fi in a fantasy setting, a crossover genre. Sorry, didn't mean to derail you yet again.
No, you're good. You're good. But so what about pirates? What about space pirates? What about something that is more psychological, something more horror? Maybe it's a more complicated system that has lots more options for player creation and weapons and equipment. What about a system that's really easy to learn for your non-gamer friends? Um, that's sort of what we're talking about tonight. And so I wanted to start by just identifying. We keep saying system, like everybody should know what that means, and I think that that is a mistake on our part. So, what is a tabletop role playing game system anyway?
So I'm going to separate out. I'm going to use two. I'm going to borrow two terms here: crunch and fluff. So crunch and fluff. Watch my hands on the screen. That's bad. I don't know. I
if
don't know
you're
what
if
to
you're an
do with my.
audio listener, you can't see him, but he's dividing two categories.
I don't. So on the left, I'm gonna over here on the left hand side. You've got crunch, and what do I mean when I say crunch? Those are the mechanics. How does the game function? What are the numbers I write down on my paper, and what do they mean? And I've decided I'm going to I'm going to pick that person's pocket as I walk by. What dice do I roll, and what's the probability that I'm going to succeed? Though that's crunch. The probabilities, the way I determine random numbers. There's some role play games that use cards. Most role play games use dice. Some role play games don't use anything. They're diceless. There are diceless role play games. Um, but that's what I mean when I talk about crunch. And when we talk about the system, it's the crunch plus the fluff. So over here on the right hand side, the fluff is the the story, the fiction, the theme, the genre. If you're playing classic Dungeons and Dragons, fifth edition, you're playing in a high fantasy game. And if you want to talk about fluff, gosh, I don't know if there's a system out there that has more fluff than D&D. And that's all the books and we when we talk about the marketplace and how books are published. I mean, we talk about splat books, or if you go into a bookstore or a friendly local game store and you see a wall of books about Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, that's great. But then if you, let's say you're at Barnes and Noble, you go around the corner and then there's a wall of books by people like R.A. Salvatore and Ed Greenwood and Lisa Smedman, and I'm leaving out hundreds, well, not hundreds, tens, dozens of other authors where you can then read about adventures in Faerun, which is the land of Dungeons and Dragons. And there's a whole, I mean, do a Google search, you'll find the history, thousands of years of history and characters and locations, and that's all the fluff. So the system is the crunchy bits. Which dice I'm going to punch that guy. What do I need to roll? You take a d20 and you've got to roll a 17 or better. Okay. I rolled a 1. Oh, that means that means this other thing over
You
here, blah blah
punch
blah.
yourself in the face.
Yeah, you catch your sleeve and rip your coat open as you swing and totally miss. And then there's the fluff, and that's the who is Drist Dwarden and who is Brunner Battlehammer and what are the main festivals of um, the land, and why do they, in Faerun, everyone measures time in 10 days instead of 7 days of a week. It's 10 fingers. That kind of stuff. That's all fluff. You can play a game without the fluff, and you can play a game and mod. So when we talk about house rules, there are house rules that deal with the crunch, because sometimes games get really, really crunchy.
Yep.
So there's lots of, when we get to GURPS, GURPS is a fantastic system, but it is very, very, I mean, when I GM GURPS, I have a flow chart for combat that I use, because there are, I don't want to say 47, but it feels like there are 47 steps to, okay, this person targets this person has initiative without surprise, this is the die with the modifier that you roll. If you hit, then you determine damage minus the damage resistance from their armor plus the modifiers for the weapon, blah 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 blah. And then okay, cool. That's a really crunchy system, and people will make house rules to modify the crunch, either to make the game more difficult, more realistic, or easier. And then
not necessarily easier, but more streamlined.
Right. Faster to play. Right. Yep. And then on the fluff side of the house, same thing. I've played Vampire the Masquerade werewolf crossover, and we had a player who just wanted to play a werewolf, and they didn't buy into the whole story and cosmology in the world of darkness around werewolves. They just wanted to be the bad guy from The Howling. And it's like, I'm a werewolf, I'm a monster, I just want to eat people and rip people to shreds. Like, why can't I hang out with vampires? It's like, well, according to the cosmology of the world and all this fluff, you're mortal enemies, blah 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 blah. And it's like, that's bullshit. Oh, okay, fine. We'll just set aside all that other stuff and we'll have some fun. So that's the system, the crunch and the fluff put together. And then you can house rule either side or both.
Right. So it's your set of rules through which you play. It is the books and stories which explain about the history of the people, the monsters, the items that all live there. But at the end of the day, your system is how you play a particular game. If you don't have any experience tabletop role-playing games at all, I would recommend going back to episode 1 and sort of getting the sort of overview episode to that. And then once you want to start getting into playing games, you'll have to pick a system and then find people that want to play that system. So if you're players, you'll have to find a DM or GM or whichever title to run that game for you. And if you are a DM GM, you have to find a group of people that want to play the adventure, the style of world, the crunch, the fluff that you want to DM for. We talked about it a lot in episode 1, but it should be fun for you running the game as much as it should be fun for your players. So make sure that there is some degree of alignment in what players and DMs want to play. So we have a big list of potential systems that you could play. We don't have the time to talk about all of them in depth.
We're gonna leave your, whoever is listening to this, we're gonna leave your favorite system out. We're totally doing that on purpose because you are gonna no, I'm kidding.
There's a big /S at the end of all of that.
Yes, that's totally sarcastic. We are going to miss things. We are going to completely skip, but the Genesis system supports Android Netrunner, and you've totally forgot about Android Netrunner for sci-fi. Yep, you're absolutely right. Totally forgot about Android Netrunner. Yeah, it's the 20th most popular board game or role-play game on this website over here, and yep, we're big dummies. We're sorry. We're gonna forget it. We can't list them all. If we tried to list every single role-play game by genre, this would be really.
It'd be all we did in 2020.
It'd be really boring too. Sci-fi. this one. So and these are our opinions about where these games fit.
Also, yes.
So, right, if I'm going to put Space 1889 in steampunk. And if you're like, "Oh, that's crap. That's science fiction." Yep. Okay. Send me an email.
Yeah, please do. But we'll touch on just about everything that we can.
All the stuff that we know about.
Yeah, at least, right? There's more stuff too that we don't know.
Yes.
We're not experts. We're just a couple of guys that like games. So let's start it real easy. You have learnt about D&D through one of the mainstream channels, whether that is YouTube or you were really into Stranger Things. You found the books in your parents' basement over the holidays. You have heard of D&D. You like the fantasy genre. So what if you actually want to run a high fantasy game? Obviously, you can play D&D, and we've talked about that enough. But what else?
Well,
What else is there?
hang on.
Oh, okay.
They can play 5th edition, which is the newest version of D&D.
Yeah.
If they got hooked on Stranger Things, they could go back and get the BX Basic and Expert Edition through the OSRIC, the open source role play game center. There are D&D 3.5, right? So when you say D&D, right, that's a continuum of games starting from 1974 to today.
Right.
Right. Now, yes, if you're new, grab 5th edition, and those books are beautiful. The production value is amazing. The rules have been tightened down, right? Notice that I did not say Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition. It's awful. It's awful, right? And we can talk about why it's awful and the joy that Pathfinder brings to the universe, but
You know that Neverwinter is based on 4th E, right?
which is perfect because Neverwinter is a video game.
Yes.
And that's exactly what that was the problem with 4th edition. We're wildly off. We need like a train crashing graphic to go around on the screen when we go off the rails. But that was the 3.5 was good. When they redid 3.5 to make 4, they wanted to piggyback off the World of Warcraft craze, EverQuest, right, all those online things. So they made the game play like an online game, and that just ruined the experience. Most people sat around the table going, I've got to do all this housekeeping. No crap, I could just play World of Warcraft and the computer does it all for me. So
Right. So for the
to
sake
be
of
fair, I have never played 4th edition, but I have read the rules.
right. The other big selling point for 5e is that the community is so active, and if you run into issues, you are more likely to find a crowdsourced solution to a 5e issue than you are an AD&D or a 3.5.
Yes.
Thing.
Yeah.
And the community around role-playing games tends to be very, very positive and supportive. So if you do run into issues, seek out Reddit, seek out Twitter. You'll find answers.
You'll get answers. Yep.
So high fantasy games, you could play any version of D&D. You're most likely to pick up 5e. But if you don't, if that's all you know, but you're not totally sold on the system, what else is there?
Pathfinder.
Okay.
From Paizo, and I know that you have this you have similar issues with Paizo that I have with Hasbro. So, but Pathfinder, there's a 1st and 2nd edition of Pathfinder. It came out of the 3.5 to 4.0 D&D conversion. Basically, when people rejected version 4 of Dungeons and Dragons, they wanted a game that played like 3.5 but was a little bit more streamlined. And Paizo, the Paizo company, tapped into that need, and they produced a massively popular high fantasy role play game called Pathfinder. So Paizo Pathfinder. Dungeon Crawl Classics is another high fantasy. So we keep using this term high fantasy. What's low fantasy?
Well, so I imagine high fantasy being orcs and elves and trolls and magic and otherworldly gods and portals to realms of fire and lots of the very, very fantasy tropes that you tend to experience, particularly in mainstream media.
Okay.
And
So then if there's a high fantasy,
there's a low fantasy.
yeah, and that's my baby.
Yes.
So if we're thinking high fantasy and we want to equate that to books and movies, uh, C.S. Lewis, Chronicles of Narnia, high fantasy, low fantasy.
So I would put that one in a middle ground.
Really?
It would lean.
Talking animals and magical lions and witches.
It leans closer to high fantasy.
Okay.
For sure. But magic isn't something that is totally accessible to everyone,
Yeah.
which is why I take that down a little bit.
Okay. Tolkien?
So again, that's sort of a middle ground where the majority of it is high fantasy. You've got orcs being summoned from summoning pools and ring wraith hell beasts. However, again, magic isn't something that is totally accessible to just anybody and everybody.
So what's your perfect high fantasy genre? Film or how about Willow?
Yeah, Willow is high fantasy.
Okay.
Sure. Anybody can become a wizard. I suppose that's true of Tolkien, right? You could just study it long enough. There's no innate magic. I don't know.
I don't know.
Not quite sure.
How about
I think Harry Potter is a high fantasy.
Yeah, I think yeah, it's contemporary high fantasy though. I'll put that qualifier in there because it's not medieval high fantasy.
Right.
I'm trying to think of other authors I would throw in that high fantasy or other movies. Willow's a good one.
Yeah. Salvatore. I mean, like
R.A. Salvatore.
All of the Legend of Drizzt, Faerun stuff is high fantasy.
Yeah, well, that's based in Dungeons and Dragons, so it's really hard. I mean, so for me, I try to look for Appendix N, and I've thrown that Appendix N out a couple of times. That's an appendix in one of the original D&D manuals where the authors talk about their inspiration for the game.
Right.
And there's the high fantasy is Tolkien. I think C.S. Lewis is high fantasy.
Warcraft, so the Warcraft universe.
The Warcraft universe is high fantasy. So low fantasy is where magic isn't as prevalent. When I think low fantasy, I'm thinking any of the Lankmar games, right? Yeah. Fritz Lieber, right? The Fafhrd and Grey Mouser. They're rogues and fighters, and more often than not, they are defeating magicians because magic is bad.
Sure.
Or it's used for bad purposes primarily.
I think of Redwall for low fantasy. That's what clicks right away.
Okay.
And that's talking animals, but it's not magic and it's not fantastical worlds with flying creatures and all of this. It's very grounded in reality, but it's not fantasy. It is, but it isn't.
So the Game of Thrones books. So I'll throw it out there. I don't watch the TV shows. I was reading. I have not seen the show. I have read all the books. I loved the books, and everyone's like, the show's okay, but it doesn't really track with the books, and it's like, don't want to hear it. When I read the last couple of books, then I'll go back and watch the show. But I want to experience the story through the books, right? So in the books, which I'm not going to spoil the books. I mean, it's probably too late now to spoil them anyway. But right, magic is not fantastic. Right?
Yeah,
magic isn't a real thing for most people. It's gritty. That's the other thing with low fantasy is it tends to be more gritty and I don't want to use the word dark, but mundane.
Dark.
No, actually, that's not really where I was headed. I was like, the big sprawling epics of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and C.S. Lewis's work. Um, in a lot of low fantasy stories, I'm just a guy who's trying to get by. Like I'm not this epic massive hero. I'm just some. Go ahead.
We forgot Skyrim and uh the universe of Tamriel as being
Hmm.
high fantasy. That's
We
probably
did.
something that is accessible to people.
We did. Or where do they have Dragon Age?
Ooh, I don't remember the
Yeah.
world name for that one.
I just know the
Don't have it.
Elysians are bad.
Yeah, right.
And Ozamar. I always play a dwarf, so I know where Ozamar is on the map, but I don't like being on the surface because I'm gonna fall into the sky.
Yeah. So yes, low fantasy being more mundane, you were saying.
Yeah. So more mundane, more grounded, less of that epic. I'm the one person who's gonna take the ring to Mordor and save the world.
Hmm.
It's more like, yeah, my friend has a runny nose because a wizard 2 towns over is casting this stupid spell. So we're gonna go beat the crap out of him so he stops casting his spell. And on the way, if we find some extra gold by, you know, being highwaymen, or it's just very anti-hero, anti-epic kind of thing. So that's the high fantasy versus your low fantasy.
Right. So high fantasy systems would be D&D, any one of them.
D&D,
Pathfinder.
Pathfinder.
So I will make the gripe that Pathfinder did not grip me in the way that it gripped you, because if I want to play a 3.5 clone, I'm just going to go play 3.5. And if I want to play the most recent thing, I'm going to go play 5e. I will, however, concede that the class diversity in Pathfinder is it leaves D&D a little bit wanting, but I think that that's okay because they're different systems meant for different things. But there are very, very cool classes in Pathfinder.
I like the breadth in Pathfinder. That's why I don't I really both I play either system. I really don't care.
Right.
Um I like the breadth of Pathfinder's universe where I find the D&D 5th edition, 3.5 through 5.0 edition D&D, when we talk about the land of Faerun,
Hmm.
um is kind of, it feels limited to me. It
Yes,
feels it
I
feels
agree.
limited into the classic Dungeons and Dragons high fantasy trope.
Hmm.
In Pathfinder, right, there's a whole action path set of modules for pirates.
Right.
There's a whole Asian based Jade Serpent adventure path, which is more Chinese. The architecture is more Chinese. The story is more. So it's the diversity
Hmm.
in the diversity in the world, the diversity in the style of adventures. Um, and yes, everything happens on a planet, um, but you know you don't have it's kind of like what Dungeon Crawl Classics does, right? If I want to play a pirate, I just stay in the shackles, which are a bunch of islands where there are pirates and gunpowder.
Right.
And if I want to play samurai and ninjas, I go over to the Empire of the Jade Serpent and I stay in that space. If I want to be in a tropical jungle, right, there's or Ustralov is the gothic vampire-y space.
Okay.
So that's what I think attracts me to Pathfinder, is that diversity, and you're not tied to certain things. I think Dungeons and Dragons tried to break out of that with the Curse of Strahd,
Yep. A little
right?
bit.
And so they have these adventures that will break you out of the traditional, right? Oh, I'm at Waterdeep and I'm going to go north, which means I'm going to hit this town and this town and that town and this town, and
Sure.
oh, now I'm in Luskin and these are the people who run Luskin, and we know that because there are 90 books about 90 books set in the city of Luskin. But then
um.
there's Dungeon Crawl Classics for high fantasy.
Yep.
Um, there's Hackmasters, which is another. um, role play game system I'm not familiar with. Tunnels and Trolls is another one that's from Flying Buffalo. Um, the nice thing with Tunnels and Trolls is they offer single player adventures.
Okay.
So it's a DM-less. So it's almost like a Which Way book, with a bunch of mechanics on it. It's very cool. You should check
Okay.
it out if you haven't ever seen it.
I immediately had to ask, how do you play a role playing game alone? Isn't that just reading a book? Like,
It's like the Which Way books, but there
choose
are
your own adventure.
choose your own adventure. But there is some dice rolling, and of course you don't you create your character and then open up the book and read page 1. And
Man.
then when there's a decision point or a fighting point, if you've succeeded in beating the troll, turn to page 53. If the troll, handed you your butt, turn to page 7.
Okay, very cool. I will look at that later. And then low fantasy, you mentioned Lankmar.
So there's a couple of different variants of Lankmar. There's Dungeon Crawl Classics Lankmar. There's Savage Worlds Lankmar. And I put RuneQuest in low fantasy, and I think that's wrong. Okay. I think RuneQuest Glorantha. And try that again. RuneQuest Glorantha belongs in its own category, because it is an epic like the Odyssey or the Iliad. It is kind of that's epic fantasy. It is Beowulf, sure. those kinds of massive stories, and it's just a completely different look and feel. I mean, yes, there are classes. Everyone plays a human, which is neat. Well, and the author is very clear. There are non-human races, but their physiology and psychology are so wildly different that it's irresponsible to ask a human player to try to put themselves into I'm a creature who spawned from a plant and I've been in the same spot for 200 years. And now you're asking me to go do this thing over here.
You can't.
Go. Role play. And you can't, right?
You can't do it. That's outstanding. That's a really interesting perspective on role playing.
Yes. Yeah. So that's another game that I want to get onto the table one of these years. But so that's RuneQuest Glorantha. That's the new release from the Chaosium.
I have the PDF for that, right?
Yes, you do.
All right, I will give that a skim as well. So I think that covers.
Does that cover your generic fantasy?
Yeah, I think so.
Because then I see on our list we're going to move into branded or intellectual property style fantasy games.
Yeah. So what if I want, I want to play a fantasy game, but I want to do it in a world that I'm familiar with. So if I've read the R.A. Salvatore books and I know about Faerun, I probably want to play D&D because that's a world that I feel comfortable feeling like I could be a part of, But there are other tabletop RPGs modeled specifically for other IPs and universes that we might have come to know. You picked up Lord of the Ring, The One Ring, last Gen Con.
2 Gen Cons ago. Yep. And it is fabulous.
That's what you were saying. Do you want to do like a couple bullet points about why that is so good and what differs it from like 5e?
So it is a high fantasy game set in Middle Earth. The books themselves are award winning, so they've won Ennies. I don't know the exact awards, but I think they won an Ennie award. And it is so there is a book for Erebor. So if you love the Misty Mountains and dwarves, the Erebor book talks all about that. There's a book for Rivendell if you're into elves and that kind of stuff. Sorry, I'm not a big elf fan. So that the source books are directly from the Lord of the Rings material themselves, not the movies, the books. Um, the system, the crunchy bits, are very much in line with the theme of the books and the movies. You form a fellowship. It's not called a party, right? It's called a fellowship.
Right.
And you might say, "Oh, that's just window dressing." Copy paste party replaced with fellowship. You don't. You actually, when you form your fellowship, you get points for your fellowship. You have fellowship points that you can use. There's a corruption mechanic. So as you're adventuring and you're moving through Mirkwood, there's a source book on Mirkwood, right? And the enemy is corrupting you, or you come in contact with a Nazgul or something, right? That corruption is going to cause you to do things you might not want to do. You can use fellowship points to right. Hey, we're all going to get together and we're going to have this meal and we're going to relax and rest and recharge. Uh, there's a season system. So there's an adventure season and there's a home front season. So I go off and I adventure, right? Just like in The Hobbit, Bilbo goes off with the dwarves and has his adventure, and then he comes home. And then there's a whole chapter on in the book, the bunch of mechanics for, yep, I'm back at Bag End, and the Sackville Bagginses have sold all my silver, and I've got to make sure my farm gets tended, and I have to hang out with my friends to build up fellowship points or to get rid of corruption. And so the mechanics lead you into that feeling of I'm playing a token game in Middle Earth.
Nice.
It's very different.
I skimmed those books a little bit, and from what you have described to me, both before now and just now, if Tolkien and Middle Earth are your bag, then Lord of the Rings: The One Ring might be a better system for you than 5e.
So I'm not gonna take us off the rails, but they also there's also a company that is publishing 5th edition versions of One Ring materials.
Oh, okay.
So if you love Tolkien, but your group is a hardcore 5e, like, oh, we played 5th edition for 4 years. I don't want to learn a new system. I don't want to get a weird 12-sided die with a Gandalf rune and a Sauron rune. Like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to learn all this new fellowship stuff. I just want to play. Basically want to play 5th edition D&D mechanics in a Middle Earth environment. Those books exist as well. So a lot of the times when we start talking about these genres and settings, they will be multi-mechanic. They'll span multiple mechanical systems.
Right. And the part of the joy of being the person running these games is that at the end of the day, you can say whatever you want about whatever you want. So if you want to change a mechanic or change a rule or change a bit of lore, you can.
As long as everybody at the table is cool with that.
Yeah, or you don't tell them.
Right.
Outside of Lord of the Rings, we mentioned Harry Potter earlier as being relatively high fantasy. And I did a little poking earlier today, and there are actually handfuls of home-written Harry Potter universe tabletop role-playing games, most of which are entirely available for free on their respective websites. So it's a lot of stuff that people have sort of home brewed. I don't know that any of it is like official and licensed, but if you want to play something in a Harry Potter universe, then that sort of content is out there and available. You just have to dig and find which one appeals to you. I have not played any of those.
I have not either.
Okay. So we won't say too much more about that.
I have picked up the book for Dragon Age. So if we're moving on, we can move on from Harry Potter. The video game Dragon Age, wildly popular. Yep. They have a role play game book. Oh, Dingleberry. Low Fantasy. Song of Fire and Ice role-play game from Green Ronin. Same company as
Okay.
so there is a um, Game of Thrones role-play game that implements the low fantasy. Sorry, I didn't mean to skip it. I told you we would skip things, right?
You did. It's you can't remember them all. There's too
No,
many.
but I have to go back and mention that because of course I kicked George R. R. Martin at Gen Con, and
The
I feel bad.
clarification is that you kicked a cosplayer of George R. R. Martin.
We don't know that for sure. I said, Mr. Martin, I'm very sorry, and he said, "Oh, that's okay," and he walked away. So
Yeah, okay.
I'm saying I kicked George R. R. Martin.
All right. You probably didn't, but you can
I
believe
probably
that.
did, but I'm gonna that's a good story.
So, have you made it through the Dragon Age rules?
I have read it. I haven't played it. It
Okay.
uses the AGE system, which is similar, which is the same mechanical system as Blue Rose, which we'll talk about further on.
Okay.
But it's a D6 system. There is a set of dice that are one color and a stunt die that's a different color, and it's got a kind of a Savage World feel. You know, you roll the stunt die. If you roll high on the die, who cares about the mechanics right now? We're talking about genre. So Dragon Age.
Well, we can get into mechanics a little bit.
Yeah.
We're about halfway through, and we still have another page of games to get through.
So let's move. So Mouse Guard, right? You talked about Redwall.
Yes.
Mouse Guard is based. So Mouse Guard is a graphic novel, similar to Redwall, or the Secret of Nim movie. Basically, anthropomorphic mice living in a society. If you like the Plaid Hat board games,
Is that not just called Mouse Guard?
Mouse Guard is the role play game. I'm thinking about the board game with the mice.
I thought it was called Mice and Mystics.
Mice and Mystics. Thank you.
Yeah,
So yeah, if you're a big fan of the Mice and Mystics board game
that
and
was
you're looking
fun.
for a role play game, right? Mouse Guard is up there.
We gotta play Mice and Mystics again.
We do.
That was a good one.
That was a good one.
And I grew up reading Redwall, so I don't know that I could convince my friends to play a tabletop role playing game set in a hey, we're gonna be talking mice with sewing needles for swords. Um, but I could get people to play Mice and Mystics.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then there's more than one now, right? Or is there just the
More than one what?
Star Wars RPG?
Oh, so you're gonna jump to sci-fi. So there are a couple of Star Wars. So there's the original West End game Star Wars from the 1980s.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
That was before me.
And then there is the Fantasy Flight large amount of Star Wars material using their Genesis role play system.
Right, that's the one that I have.
Yes. Yep. So yeah, so if we're hopping over to sci-fi, so those are your fantasy, and that's not it, right? There are many other fantasy games that you can play. I think I mentioned Hackmasters. I've seen it on the shelf. I've never picked up the book. I have enough role play games.
I have enough books.
But moving into sci-fi, I know you wanted to start with Star Wars.
Well, that's okay. I mean, we touched on it. They know that it's out there.
That's intellectual property that everybody's kind of familiar with.
That's also kind of on an upsurge since The Mandalorian has come out and the new movies.
A lot of people are thrilled with that, right? Yeah. Other sci-fi based on intellectual properties. Savage Worlds has a Flash Gordon game. So the movie Flash Gordon. I know you probably don't know Flash.
I don't know what that is.
Flash. Just Google it. There's a couple of good movies. Flash Gordon. He's Connecticut and King is like Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court kind of thing, where an everyday man gets thrown to an alien world and has to come to terms with it, kind of thing. Kind of like a John Crater of Mars style story.
You mean John Carter?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I gotcha.
Yep. It's an Edgar Rice Burroughs style adventure, swashbuckling, that kind of thing. When we talk about sci-fi games, I think the one that I want to talk about the most is Traveler.
Yeah,
which was
yeah.
one of the first. So Metamorphosis Alpha came, Traveler came out. Um, Traveler's on its fifth edition. There are multiple forks in it. So if you start talking about the Traveler universe, there's a whole. We could do 3 or 4 shows on the history of Traveler, but Traveler's the quintessential sci-fi um, role play game.
Okay.
Okay. There's a whole backstory. The nice thing is that the universe is so massive and faster than light travel is still only relatively. I mean, if you can travel faster than light, you can only travel so much faster than light, and a 500 million light year jump is going to take you thousands of years. So you can
Right.
have your own little universe. Here's my little universe. There's 12 star systems, and we're off on this part of the galaxy, and everyone leaves us alone. So you don't have. It's one of those. Again, you get the diversity. Like you
Mhm.
can play a Imperium, follow the canon calendar um, story, or you can just like, yeah, we got 5 or 6 planets over here, and this is our deal, kind of thing. So,
All right.
Traveler, and then Starfinder, right, which is the
So just before you get past it,
yeah,
because I know you have told me much of Traveler. Bullet points. What mechanically separate, like fluff wise, we know, right?
right.
Sci-fi is very different from the D&D 5e world. Mechanically, are there any glaring differences?
So it depends. That's not an easy question to answer. That because the Traveler universe. So the Traveler universe has got 2 large camps, if you will. Mongoose Publishing has published a softer, friendlier version of Traveler, the Mongoose Traveler, um, and that is kind of a classic sci-fi. It's streamlined mechanics, and they've taken a lot of the crunch out of the game.
Okay.
Okay, I just got the T5 set, which I love.
Is that Traveler 5th edition?
Fifth edition, written. Mark Miller is the original author. He just finished that Kickstarter, and I have my big black books, and you need a physics book if you want to do spaceship combat. There are actual equations that you have to calculate to figure out, if my spaceship has a mass of 900 metric tons and I'm accelerating at 3 Gs, how long is it going to take me to get from here to there? So
Wow.
I love that because I like physics.
Right.
I like physics and math. Okay, I'm sorry. I like it. So um
Don't ever apologize.
you can play if you want to get down to that level of, I'm going to build this spaceship, I'm going to have 900 metric tons, it's going to travel at this speed and this rate, and how long is it going to take me to get, if you want to do that kind of very heavy scientific game, Traveler T5 is your baby. If you just want to be, I'm in a, in a seedy space ranger bar, and I'm going to jump on a spaceship with my buddy here, and we're going to go, to some planet and try to figure out who has Algolian sun tiger teeth so we can mix a pangalactic gargle blaster, right? That's Mongoose Traveler.
It could also be Starfinder.
And it could be Starfinder, because so Starfinder is Paizo's, and we'll probably get flack for this because there's science fiction, right?
Yep.
And there's science fantasy.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I mean,
In my rattled
fantasy is
brain.
just a deeper fiction, so I don't think you're wrong by saying science fantasy is science fiction.
So in my head's Traveler, Alien, and Gamma World, to a smaller extent, are your science fiction. Like there's no magic. So
Okay.
in
Okay.
science fiction, there's technology. There might be advanced technology you don't know how it works, but I've got a blaster pistol. I jump on a spaceship. We go into hyperspace. Blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
Right. Where science fantasy, in the Starfinder world, I can still be an elf. and I can still cast spells. Like I have magic, I have spell slots, and I can cast spells and that kind of thing. So
Okay.
I separate those two,
Sure.
right? And then Mutant Crawl Classics and Gamma World. There's and start. We got to talk about Shadowrun.
Okay.
Or else Shadowrun, I think, is in that science fantasy because there's orcs
So,
and elves and dwarves. Oh, go
so
ahead.
no, I just don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. So Gamma World.
Gamma World, Gamma World, and Mutant Crawl Classics, Numenera for some folks, and I'll even throw Pugmire and the Monarchies of Mao in there. Um, these are all post-apocalyptic games. So
Okay.
the Ralph Bakshi movie Wizards, right?
Oh man, yes.
So um, Thundar the Barbarian, that cartoon, right? Yeah, the idiots in the 20th century nuked each other, and 100 years or 1,000 years later, boom, right? Survive.
Okay.
So from a video game standpoint, right? Fallout.
Sure. So if you are a big fan of Fallout and you want to turn that into a tabletop RPG, look at Gamma World and
Gamma
Mutant Crawl
World and
Classics.
Mutant Crawl Classics. And then I threw Pugmire and the Monarchies of Mao in there as well because those are um, they kind of fit in with Numenera as well,
I
right?
don't. They those go back to low fantasy, right? Because Pugmire is Mouse Guard, but with dogs,
But
right?
no, so kind of sort of, but not really.
Okay.
Um, the premise in Pugmire and Monarchies of Mao is the cat version of Pugmire. So we'll just stick with Pugmire because it's easier to say.
Yep.
Uh, fifth edition D&D mechanics. The setting, you're anthropomorphic dogs, but you are in a post-apocalyptic world.
Okay.
So there are the ruins in the land. It's high fantasy because there's magic.
Hmm.
The ruins strewn about the land are the leavings of man, right? And the
Okay.
religion that the dogs follow is kind of this canon of man: be a good dog, don't bite anyone who deserves it. So it's right. Whatever happened to humanity, we've lost the planet. We're dead. We've been gone for thousands of years. And these uplifted dogs are now running the show. They've made it technology wise to a high fantasy space with magic. And they find runes every once in a while.
Sure. But that's not sci-fi.
It depends on how you play it, but yeah. So that's more of a post. So I guess I'm creating an offshoot of sci-fi called post-apocalyptic adventure, and Numenera fits in there too, right? Because it's a billion years in the future. There have been nine. We are the players are in the ninth civilization, right?
Right.
There's talk that the octopi were a civilization. Um, they're like special weird creatures in the seas. But yeah, so Numenera, Pugmire.
Numenera is because I really um I liked that one. We haven't played
Yes.
it yet, but they put out a short video about it that I think I shared with you. That was 2 years ago,
Yeah.
but that was really cool. And so, just to elaborate on what Numenera is, um, the Numenera, as they are called, are sort of relics from the past, whatever 909 billion years, whatever it is, some immense amount of time.
It's a billion. So from today, it's a billion years in the future.
Right.
The
So,
planet Mercury is gone. For whatever reason, the planet Mercury is missing in our solar system.
mhm,
Um, and humanity has kind of returned to a feudalistic subsistence agriculture society, generally, and then there are pockets of technology. Um, there are mechanical people. There's a cloud of nanobots called the Iron Wind that blow around the planet, causing all sorts of misery and heartbreak and damage. Um, and the people of the ninth world are basically it's like role playing in a garbage dump full of half broken toys.
Yeah, where the Numenera are these items that are relics from the past that are potentially partly technological and potentially partly magical. Um, if you're somebody who has played 5e or Pathfinder or something, and you really like unique and interesting magic items, like if that's why you play the game, so that you can have your hand on all these
Yeah.
goodies that do weird things, look at Numenera, because that is the whole thing is about these weird, quirky, half cyber, half magic item relics. And that would be something that I know I can think of a couple people that would really like that.
Yeah. Okay.
You want
Shadowrun.
Shadowrun? Yep.
So Shadowrun is science low fantasy. So
Okay.
think Blade Runner with orcs and dwarves and elves,
Okay. Good
right?
summary.
Yeah. I mean that's I haven't played it. Um I've read the quick start a couple of times. But I haven't never had a chance to play it. So
Okay. Um, and we mentioned Alien at the very beginning of the show.
yeah,
Um,
that is if you like the movies, that is a role play game based on the movies. You're fighting xenomorphs or running away from xenomorphs. That one has a very interesting stress mental breakdown mechanic, which I'm looking forward to experimenting with on Monday.
Very cool. So if you like that sort of stress mental breakdown, what if you want to go darker than sci-fi? What if you want to go into the realm of horror tabletop RPGs?
Well, then you've
Um,
got to talk about Call of Cthulhu from Chaos.
well, why don't you?
So, and Call of Cthulhu is another one that's been around for a long, long time. It's like Traveler and Dungeons and Dragons. It's um, the nice thing with Call of Cthulhu also has multiple genres. Classic Call of Cthulhu is played in the 1920s, so 100 years ago.
Holy
Um,
crap.
there, yeah, 100 years
Whoa.
ago.
Whoa.
Um, there is Victorian Call of Cthulhu. There's a lot of different genres, but it's basically the work of H.P. Lovecraft. It's a horror role play game. So kind of like Alien. Alien is set up as a horror role play game, but Call of Cthulhu is you are traditionally your average folks. You're just generic people, right? The last game I played with my buddies out in Ohio, um, we were visiting Moncton, Vermont. Moncton, Vermont, I don't think exists. Willowton, Vermont, which doesn't exist, for a Halloween festival, and it was 1920, Halloween 1927, and we were, bobbing for apples, and we were going to go to have a dinner, and then there was a corn maze, and some Boy Scouts disappeared in the corn maze. And the town drunk was angry that his family farm was being sold to out of towners. Um, and he was causing all sorts of commotion.
Uh,
Okay. And then all of a sudden, pets start to go missing. And we find a discarded knife and way more blood than should be by the town drunk's apartment, backstairs to his apartment. And things start to unravel, and it goes. So H Call of Cthulhu games traditionally, and my buddy said this, Dan told me this. He goes, if you are reaching for a pistol, you're probably just going to shoot yourself. Like if you're a character that wants to kick butt and beat monsters, don't play Call of Cthulhu, because most of the monsters are incomprehensible,
yep.
and like at the end of the game, my character was the only character to survive. No, two of us survived because we had gone down to um, Worcester and bought dynamite. We had gone down to Worcester, Mass, bought dynamite, drove back to Willowton, um, because there was this weird rock that was always warm. It was chilly because it's Vermont in Halloween, and this weird rock is humming and it's really warm, and we're like, we don't know what it is, but maybe it just shouldn't be here anymore. We'll get rid of it. We're gonna blow it up.
Very
Uh,
1920s of you.
we didn't blow up the rock because by the time we got there, um, we had the dynamite close to the rock. Something crawled out from under the rock and took the form of a jack-o'-lantern with tentacles and started chasing us. So we lit the dynamite, and unfortunately, one of our colleagues tripped. He went to the costume party dressed as Mae West. Broke a heel because he failed a escape roll. He botched an escape roll, and he exploded with the dynamite.
Oh no.
He was bait basically for the monster.
Terrific.
That's the only reason. That's the only reason we all got away is because Rocky was bait.
Terrific.
But that's that horror. It's very dark. Um, and the whole idea behind the Call of Cthulhu is you're just average folks tossed into this weird situation. Other dark role play games, Vampire, the whole world of darkness, right? Darkness is in the title. Those games can go one of two ways, right? If you're playing Vampire the Masquerade from White Wolf Games, you can either be playing a very introspective, think Interview with a Vampire, if you've read the book or seen the movie, like what has happened to me, why am I like this? I'm not really sure. I should be killing people to continue my existence.
Yeah, you described it as superheroes with fangs.
So that's the other style of game, right? That's superheroes. So there's the angsty personal horror, Anne Rice style game. And then there is the Vampire Diaries Twilight. I'm fabulously wealthy and wildly attractive to the opposite sex, and I have fangs, and I'm going to do cool things. So that's your vampire. Then werewolf, mage, changeling, wraith, that whole world of darkness. There are lots of cool stories and cool games that you can play. I think when we played, we were watching Lost Girl on Netflix, and we tried to do a mixture of changeling and vampire, which it was okay.
Yeah, it was okay.
It was okay, but it didn't go where I wanted it to.
And no, that would have been better if you didn't have me at that table, but that's okay.
Yeah, you're a problem player. We'll talk about your type of problem players in a different show.
Yeah.
So, moving on.
Well,
What?
I want to
go ahead.
I want to add 10 Candles.
Oh yeah, talk about 10 Candles.
Because that's one that I played when I was home for Thanksgiving with one of my buddies, and he had played it a couple times with a group of people that had not played any tabletop RPGs before. And so 10 Candles is a really, really good newbie roleplay game where the rules and the crunch of it are very, very small, and you do the bulk of that together, and then the entirety of the rest of it is role playing and fluff. So you've got you light 10 tea light candles around a dish that is non-flammable, and it's best to play in the dark. Obviously, it's a horror game. And so at the beginning, when you're doing character creation, everybody writes down something good. I forget what they call it, like a virtue. And so it's something that is virtuous about your character. So maybe you're heroic, maybe you are confident. Then you write down. Then you pass that off to. I think it goes right. Doesn't matter. And then you write a vice. So you're an alcoholic. You are a coward. You have a prosthetic limb. We had 2 people in our game with prosthetic limbs. And then you pass that to somebody else, and then you write a a moment where you could be heroic, and then you write a brink, which is the farthest that you'll go before you'll only go there if you break. Um, and then over the course of the evening, when scenes change or if characters die, you extinguish candles. And whenever a candle is extinguished, you sort of move on to the next scene, and everybody establishes some truths about the scene. So you might be trying to retrieve gasoline from a truck, and you might roll for it, and the truck explodes, and people go around the table saying what their truths are, and there was fresh food and water in the truck. The truck would not have exploded if we had done this. My character found a penny on the ground because you wanted a penny. It's very, very storytelling directed and is not crunchy. Everybody rolls from the same pool of dice, which slowly gets smaller. Um, but that one is very thematic, very RP heavy, light on rules, and excellent for first time role players. Um, moving
So
along. Oh,
moving. So I'm one on the dark humor side of things. There's Paranoia.
yes.
So this is kind of a sci-fi game. Your clones. You're in a closed biodome environment thing. You don't know why. There's an insane computer that runs your life, and you basically take orders from the computer. Everyone is out to get you. Character creation is fantastic because it goes round robin. So if I take 2 points in strength and I hand the card to John, he now takes a -2 in a stat.
Interesting.
And that's how you do carry. So I'm always taking a positive. I take a negative stat from the person who's handing me hey, I'm going to take 3 in firearms. Great. Now I have to take a -3 in something. Thanks, jerk. I'll take a -3 in diplomacy. Right.
If you've got guns, what do you need your words for?
Or if you take a 3 in firearms, I'll take a -3 in combat. Now you have to fight the whole time, jerk. And you create these little minor animosities between the players. There is a happiness officer who's responsible to make sure everyone in the party is happy. There's a political officer to make sure that nobody is a traitor and everyone obeys the computer. The computer has a random deck of cards, and it'll just make a wild malfunction like, hey, you need to go replace all of the hockey pucks in the urinals in the lavatory on level 7. You get to level 7 and you realize that it's a food processing plant and there are no lavatories. Well, if you tell the computer it was wrong, right, the political officer should shoot you. Right. And you have six clones. So it's okay. If you end the game with all 6 clones, you've done something wrong. You actually don't get as much experience points as the other people. So Paranoia, it's kind of dark. It's very dark, but it's a humor. It's got that dark humor element to it. Yeah. All right. So let's move on to other genres, and then we can kind of. I mean, the thing is, we could keep going, right, with genres.
Right.
We've got pirates on the list here. There's a bunch of pirate games. There's a Pathfinder. We've already talked about the Adventure Path for Skull and Shackles. Pirates of the Spanish Main is from Pinnacle Entertainment that uses the Savage World rules. So
it's the role play game.
The role play game based on the collectible card ship game from the 1990s.
Yeah, because that was rad.
And then the 50 Fathoms is another pirate fantasy game, also from Pinnacle Entertainment Group. Uses the same mechanics, but it's a different. Basically, you sail through the Bermuda Triangle in our world, and you sail into a world that is basically flooded, except for some small archipelago of islands, and it's neat. There's magic, right? So it's more of a fantastic fantasy pirate model. And then there's Seventh Sea, which we should spend a little bit of time talking about Seventh Sea. So
yeah, no, you like Seventh Sea a lot.
We've played it a couple times. It's fabulous. The difficulty with some groups with 7th C is the mechanics. So it is wildly different mechanically than a lot of other role play games where you have a character sheet, you have stats, but when you collect a dice pool and roll the dice, you, the player, tell the story based on the number of successes that you rolled. So they're called raises. I roll, right. I'm in a scene, and the storyteller, the GM, sets the scene. You're at I was at a game. We were at the finale of the 7th game I was playing, and I was Giuseppe, the Vodacci rake, um, and there was a book. There's an ancient tome that we had to recover for a lady, but at the very end, we think the lady might be dirty. We think she's been using us this whole time. And the monks that we're taking the book from are saying, "Oh no, please don't take the book," and so I go, "Well, I'm going to try and diffuse the situation. That's the setup. We're in the basement of the library. We think this is the book. Giuseppe's going to pull it off the shelf, and then I said, I'm going to use sleight of hand and wits to try to fake out the lady and see if she reacts." And so the GM said, "Okay, well," so I roll
this, yeah.
and I said, "Okay, so I got 4 raises. So I'm going to confidently walk over and go, 'This is the book.'" I did a bad Italian accent for this character. And so that's raise number 1. Raise number 2, I'm going to quietly use my tinderbox. Raise number 1, I know where the book is on the shelf, but I'm going to make a big deal of looking for the book to buy myself a little time. Yeah. With raise number 2, I'm going to use my tinderbox and sleight of hand to get a little bit of a fire going in my sleeve, right? Because I've got these big lacy, Renaissance puffy shirt kind of thing, right? And raise number 3, as soon as I get enough smoke going on that cuff, I'm going to pull the book, not the right book, off the shelf. And then raise number 4, I'm going to make a big deal about how I opened the book and I'm not virtuous and now I'm catching fire because a sinner can never open this book. And I'm going to try to make that, I'm going to make that believable, and everybody's going to believe me that I'm on fire.
Nice.
So that was, I rolled my dice pool, and I, the player, came up with that whole string of consequences or activities, right? And then the GM said, "Okay, based on that, the lady rushes and grabs the book from you. The monks grab water to help you." It's like, aha! Now we know she is dirty, and now she's got a book that doesn't belong because I know which one it is, and I grabbed the wrong book on purpose. So it's you use your raises as the character to tell a story. Where in 5th edition it would be like, okay, make a deception roll. Okay, I made a deception roll. Yep, you deceive her. It's a different style of game. So if you have a lot of folks who are good storytellers, a lot of folks who are good improv, 7th C 2nd edition is fabulous for that kind of stuff. Nice. And the world is massive. The source books detail every single nation. It's basically Theia is Europe. And each of the regions of Europe, the French are the Montaignes, the Italians are the Vodacci, English are Avalon, the Spanish are Castile, right? There is a trope or a cultural equivalent to a lot of European nations, but the books are beautiful, and the world is just totally immersive. Fabulous game. Yeah.
Very cool. The die rolling sounds similar to 10 Candles, where you sort of have narrative control for a moment.
Yeah, until you do something dumb, and then the GM comes and says, "No. One success doesn't mean you just win the fight. You scored a hit," kind of thing. I threw Cowboys on here on your list because there's Deadlands, Boot Hill, U.S. Marshals. There's Cowboy genre games.
So that's a quick listing of it. If you are interested in those, it was Deadlands, Boot Hill, and U.S. Marshals. We've got some options for steampunk if you're a fan of those. Rippers, which is a Savage Worlds system game.
Yep. So that's Victorian England with that's Jack the Ripper, Frankenstein's monster, Dracula. It's kind of a horror Victorian steampunky. It's not necessarily steampunk as it's more Victorian, but
Sure.
Space 1889. That's your Jules Verne creates like. So if you like the Jules Verne style books, um, basically
The
the
Nautilus.
so think the Nautilus in space.
Oh man.
So they create spacecraft that go to Mars, right? John Carter
Sure.
style. So Mars and Venus have been colonized by the Americans and the Brits and the French and the Germans. Um, and there's all sorts of exciting stuff going on. Victoriana is another one that I've seen on the shelf many times. I've looked at it. I've never read the book. And then Through the Breach, if you like the Malifaux small squad tactics miniatures game, Through the Breach is the Malifaux role play game.
Is that set in the same universe with the same factions?
It is same
Okay.
factions, 10 Thunderers, goblins. You don't get to role play the Resurrectionists. Maybe I will have to look. I've only that's one that I've pulled out because I have the Malifaux game, the miniatures game. I look at it and go, "Whoa, I should." All right. So then, others. So I put in others down here because I want to mutant and masterminds. There are superhero games.
Oh, totally.
So we talked about vampire
Masks.
kind of being. Oh, go ahead.
For superhero games, I learned about one over this summer called Masks. That is lots of that is available online. There's a little free PDF starter kit, and that one does superheroes in a easy to understand way, but that is still interesting.
And then I put Blue Rose on the list because that doesn't really fit. That is a fantasy romance game.
Cool.
So Mercedes Lackey is one of the primary authors. She's not the author of the game, but that genre of literature.
Mm-hmm.
So it's primarily female or feminist authors, and it's high fantasy. There's magic. There's talking horses and talking cats and psychic animals. But the game isn't kick down a door, beat the crap out of whoever's on the other side of the door, take their gold, walk down the hall, kick down the next door. It's more relationship building. You get experience points and you do progress in the game as you build relationships and emotional attachments to people.
Sure.
So I couldn't really fit it any place,
Right,
but
no, that makes sense. There's
but
not very combat heavy, but more RP heavy.
and it's a really good game. So and then I threw in the Weird Wars, so World War II, right? So Savage Worlds has one. Achtung Cthulhu is the Call of Cthulhu World War II genre. So there are those, and then I put in GURPS because we really haven't talked about GURPS. We haven't the other one we haven't talked about is Fudge, and GURPS and Fudge I put into a genreless category.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I was going to talk about GURPS last, but we're running close to the end of time here. So,
we are at last, so go ahead.
Yeah, so GURPS is the only one that I am aware of that is truly a jack of all trades system, where if you have no idea where you want the group to go, but you want to have maybe elements of fantasy, maybe elements of uh, high fantasy, low fantasy. Maybe you want sci-fi, so your orc barbarian is wielding some sort of laser sword from the 40K universe, and then you want to throw them into Victorian England or Renaissance time seafaring. Cyberpunk, that's about to be really big with Cyberpunk 2077 coming out. If you want a tabletop role-play game that you can do Cyberpunk in, GURPS has a little bit of something for everything.
and it has and more, right? So there's I put
And
in
more.
the notes here I put Aztecs. So if you wanted to just role play a historically accurate Roman Empire game, right? You can use GURPS.
Yeah.
You wanted to do a colonial American experience, GURPS, right? There are GURPS source books and enough material out there so that you can run a GURPS. GURPS stands for the Generic Universal Roleplay System, right? And that's what it's built to do, is to be generic, so you can. And the mechanics, the way the crunch works, is it's very easy to take a Victorian style game. Like I'm going to play H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. So I have a guy, he's a Victorian human being. He jumps in a time machine, and instead of going to the Eloys and the Morlocks, he goes to 1967 Vietnam.
Yeah.
Okay. And then he is in the middle of a firefight with M16. He's got a Weatherby 38 cavalry pistol revolver, and he's in a firefight with Viet Cong with AK-47s. And then he jumps in his time machine and he goes to the restaurant at the end of the universe where he meets Zaphod Beeblebrox and Ford Prefect and has a drink.
Sure.
And GURPS, the way GURPS, the mechanics are structured, you can easily do that kind of game. Right?
Yeah.
Fate, I put Fate up there too. So Fate is the other generic game system. And then Savage Worlds probably belongs on there as well.
Okay.
So
really fast, I do want to mention No Thank You Evil, because that is one that
oh yeah, threw that on
we
here too.
looked at Gen Con together. And we don't have the time to talk about it a lot, but I mentioned it in episode 1. I ran a therapeutic gaming group, my first job out of college, and I recommended No Thank You Evil to other counselors and therapists at the place that I worked, who work with younger kids than me, and they actually picked up a copy and started using it and said that people loved it. So if you're looking for a tabletop role-playing game that isn't all hack and slash dungeon crawl with dragons, maybe more appropriate for like 4 to 12-year-olds, give a look to No Thank You Evil.
Yeah.
We did rush through there a little bit at the end, but like we said at the beginning, there is a ton of them, and we probably still missed some.
We missed a lot, but
yeah.
because you have Fiasco on the list and we didn't even talk Fiasco.
Right.
Another show was, and I mean that's when we talk about what to do in the future for shows. We could pick one of these
and do a whole show on it.
And do a whole show on. Yeah, we could do an entire show on Fiasco.
But that's gonna be it for this week. So in summary, there are tons of games that you can pick from. How are you supposed to choose? Do you have players? Do they have something that they already want to play? Have they already picked something and asked you to DM? If not, what kind of adventure do they want to play? What kind of adventure do you want to run? How complicated do you want it to be? Crunch versus fluff. And then are there any other considerations? So do you really want to play a Star Wars game? Do you want to play a game with kids? I think that we've touched on enough of them so that you have a little bit of an idea. If you have anything that you want to hear more about, please shoot us a tweet. I am at jmskoda5, or you can tweet at redhoodiegames. But that's going to be it for Set the Table episode 2. So thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Bye.